behind the polished gates of Windsor Castle, where every gesture is measured and every word carries weight, a single moment can shatter years of carefully constructed royal protocol. On a crisp autumn morning in 2023, what began as a routine family gathering would spiral into an incident that would test the very foundations of modern monarchy. Princess, and known for her unwavering composure and sharp wit, found herself witnessing something that would challenge everything she believed about duty, family, and the delicate balance between public service and private pain. The guard who stood silently in the corner would later describe it as the moment when the mask slipped, revealing the human faces behind the crowns. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle's inner courtyard as Princess and made her way toward the family quarters. Her stride was purposeful, as always, her riding boots clicking against the ancient stones with the rhythm of someone who had walked these paths for decades. At 73, and remained the hardest-working member of the royal family, her calendar packed with engagements that would exhaust people half her age. But today was different. Today was meant to be family time. The Princess Royal had arrived early for what was supposed to be a private lunch with King Charles and Queen Camilla. These informal gatherings had become more frequent since the coronation, a conscious effort by the new monarch to strengthen family bonds that had been strained by years of public scrutiny and personal upheavals, and appreciated these moments, though she would never admit it publicly. Behind her reputation for being brusque and no-nonsense lay a deep loyalty to the institution of monarchy and an even deeper love for her brother. As she approached the private dining room in the castle's Augusta Tower and noticed an unusual level of activity among the staff, footmen moved with hurried efficiency, their usual measured pace replaced by something that bordered on urgency. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper who had served the family for over 30 years, caught Anne's eye and offered a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Your Royal Highness," Mrs. Henderson said with a slight curtsy. "Their Majesties are in the blue drawing room. There's been a slight change of plans." And raised an eyebrow, a gesture that had intimidated government ministers and foreign dignitaries alike. "What sort of change?" Before Mrs. Henderson could respond, raised voices echoed from down the corridor, and recognized her brother's voice immediately, though she had rarely heard it carry such strain. Charles was speaking in rapid, clipped sentences, the kind of tone he used when trying to maintain control in a deteriorating situation. "Perhaps we should postpone until—" Mrs. Henderson began, and was already walking toward the sound. The blue drawing room had been redecorated since Anne's last visit, its walls now adorned with paintings from the royal collection that spoke to Charles's more modern artistic tastes. But the room's elegance was lost on Anne as she took in the scene before her. Charles stood near the fireplace, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. His tie was loosened, and his hands moved restlessly as he spoke. Across from him, Queen Camilla sat in a high-backed chair, her face pale and drawn. Between them, pacing like a caged animal, was Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's son from her first marriage. At 48, Tom had always been the more volatile of Camilla's two children. Where his sister Laura had embraced a quiet life away from the spotlight, Tom had struggled with the weight of his mother's position and the constant scrutiny that came with it. "You don't understand," Tom was saying, his voice rising with each word. "This isn't just about me anymore. They're involving Emma now, questioning her at her workplace. My children are being followed to school." And I'd never seen Tom like this. Usually charming and quick with his self-deprecating joke, he now appeared haggard, his eyes bloodshot and his hands shaking slightly. She noticed a security guard standing discreetly near the door, a man she recognized as Detective Inspector Morrison from the Royal Protection Unit. Morrison's presence suggested this was more than a family disagreement. "Tom, please," Camilla said softly, reaching out toward her son. "We discussed this. The protection officers are looking into it. These things take time to resolve properly." "Time?" Tom laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mother, they published photos of Harry at his school sports day. 10 years old, and his face is splashed across the tabloids because of who his grandmother is." Charles stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority that came naturally to him after decades of public service. Tom, I understand your frustration, but we must handle this through proper channels. The press office is coordinating with the press office. Tom whirled around to face his stepfather. Charles, with all due respect, your press office has been handling things for months. Meanwhile, my family is living in a fishbowl, and every mistake I've ever made is being dragged up and examined under a microscope. And remained silent, observing the dynamics playing out before her. She had dealt with media intrusion for her entire life, had watched her own children struggle with the burden of royal connection. But Tom's situation was different. He wasn't born into this life. He had been thrust into it by circumstance and his mother's love affair with the heir to the throne. The guard, Morrison, shifted slightly, his trained eyes moving between the family members and the various exit points, and knew he was calculating risks, assessing threats that went beyond the obvious. The Royal Protection Unit didn't post officers at family gatherings unless there was genuine concern for safety. What specifically has happened? And asked, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. All eyes turned to her, and she saw relief flicker across Charles's face. And had always been the problem solver, the one who could cut through emotion to find practical solutions. Tom looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to trust her with the full truth. Finally, he walked to a side table and picked up his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be dozens of missed calls and text messages. It started 3 weeks ago, he said, his voice steadier now that he had someone's full attention. A story appeared in one of the tabloids suggesting that I had used my connection to the royal family to influence a business deal. Complete fabrication, but it spread across social media like wildfire. He handed the phone to Anne, who scrolled through screenshots of newspaper articles, social media posts, and what appeared to be threatening messages. The headlines grew increasingly sensational. Camilla's son in corruption scandal. Royal stepson's secret deals. I.S. Tom Parker Bowles profiting from the crown. The business deal they're referring to, Tom continued, was a legitimate contract my food consultancy firm won through a competitive bidding process. I've done work for hotels and restaurants for years, long before Mother married Charles. But somehow, they've twisted it into evidence of royal favoritism. And continued reading, her expression growing darker with each screenshot. The comment section of the social media posts were particularly vicious, filled with accusations and personal attacks that went far beyond criticism of alleged business practices. The worst part, Tom said, slumping into a chair, is that it's not just affecting me. Emma's employer called her into a meeting yesterday, asking about her associations and whether they might create conflicts of interest for the company. She's a damn architect, and she designs office buildings. But because she's married to me, suddenly, she's a liability. Camilla wiped at her eyes with a handkerchief, trying to maintain the composure that had been drilled into her through years of royal training. I never wanted this for my children, she said quietly. When I married Charles, I thought we could protect them somehow, keep them separate from all of this. Charles moved to stand behind his wife's chair, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. We will protect them, he said firmly. But we need to be smart about how we respond. Any action we take will be scrutinized and potentially used against us. That's exactly the problem, Tom said, standing up again and resuming his pacing. We can't respond. We can't defend ourselves. We have to sit here and take it while they destroy our reputations and terrorize our families. And finished reading and handed the phone back to Tom. She had dealt with media storms before, had weathered her own share of scandals and controversies. But this felt different, more targeted, and personal than the usual royal coverage. Who's behind this? She asked. This isn't random tabloid gossip. Someone is orchestrating this campaign. Morrison stepped forward slightly, catching Anne's eye. Your Royal Highness, we believe there may be connections to individuals who have previously targeted the royal family. We're investigating, but these things often involve multiple actors with different motivations. Multiple actors, Anne repeated. You mean it's not just one disgruntled journalist or photographer? No, ma'am. Social media has made it possible for small groups to amplify their message far beyond what traditional media could achieve. They create content shared across multiple platforms and use algorithms to ensure maximum visibility. Tom laughed bitterly. Maximum visibility. That's certainly what they've achieved. My daughter called me yesterday, crying, because her friends at university had seen the stories. She asked me if I was a criminal. The room fell silent. Even Charles, who had faced decades of intense media scrutiny, seemed shaken by the raw pain in Tom's voice, and studied her stepnephew's face, seeing not just frustration, but genuine fear. This wasn't about wounded pride or damaged reputation. This was about a man watching his family suffer for choices they hadn't made. "What do you need?" and asked simply. Tom looked surprised by the directness of the question. "I need them to stop. I need my children to be able to go to school without being followed. I need my wife to go to work without being questioned about her loyalty. I need to be able to run my business without every client wondering if I'm trying to leverage my royal connections. And if they don't stop?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the castle grounds where tourists were taking photographs of the very walls that now felt like a prison to his family. "Then, I don't know how much longer we can live like this," he said finally. "Emma's already talking about moving abroad. The children are confused and scared. This isn't a life I want for them." Camilla let out a small sob, quickly stifled behind her handkerchief. The thought of her son leaving the country, of being forced to choose between her role as queen and her role as a mother, was clearly tearing her apart. Charles's jaw tightened and recognized the expression. It was the same look he had worn as a young man when faced with impossible choices between duty and desire. Now, decades later, he was watching his stepson face a similar dilemma, but with much higher stakes. "There has to be another way," Charles said. "We don't abandon family. We find solutions." "Do we?" Tom asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Or do we just tell ourselves that while good people suffer for our mistakes?" The question hung in the air like smoke from the fireplace, and looked around the room, taking in the faces of her family members, each struggling with their own version of the same impossible equation. How do you balance personal happiness with public duty? How do you protect the people you love without compromising the institution you serve? Morrison cleared his throat gently. "Your Majesties, if I may suggest, there are some developments you should be aware of. We've identified at least 3 separate groups coordinating these attacks on social media. 2 appear to be politically motivated, possibly connected to Republican movements. The third," he paused, glancing at Tom before continuing. "The third appears to be more personal in nature. We believe someone with direct knowledge of Mr. Parker Bowles' business activities is feeding information to the media." The implications of Morrison's words settled over the room like a cold fog. Someone close to Tom, someone he trusted, was betraying him, and watched her stepnephew's face as the realization hit him, saw the moment when hurt replaced anger in his eyes. "Who?" Tom asked quietly. "We're still investigating, sir. But we wanted you to be aware that this may not simply be external harassment. There may be internal factors at play as well." Tom sat down heavily, as if the weight of Morrison's revelation had physically knocked the strength out of him. Camilla reached for his hand, but he pulled away, lost in his own thoughts. "Internal factors," he repeated. "Someone I work with. Someone I trust." And had seen this before, had watched people she cared about discover that their inner circles had been compromised. It was one of the most painful aspects of public life, the constant uncertainty about who could be trusted with the truth. The afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the blue drawing room. What was supposed to have been a simple family lunch had become something much more complex and troubling, and realized that they were witnessing more than just a media attack on one family member. They were seeing the evolution of modern warfare against a monarchy, sophisticated and targeted in ways that traditional palace security had never been designed to handle. As the conversation continued around her, and found herself studying Morrison's face, trying to read between the lines of his carefully chosen words, she suspected there was more to this story, details that were being withheld either to protect Tom or to avoid compromising ongoing investigations. Whatever the full truth, one thing was becoming clear. This incident would test not only Tom's resolve, but the entire family's commitment to supporting each other through the unique challenges of royal life. The guard who watched from the corner had seen many family crises over his years of service, but even he seemed to recognize that something fundamental was shifting in the ancient walls of Windsor Castle. Second document, the tension in the blue drawing room had thickened considerably as Detective Inspector Morrison's words settled over the family, and watched Tom process the possibility that someone in his inner circle was actively working against him. The betrayal cut deeper than any tabloid headline could, striking at the foundation of trust that made normal life possible. "I need to know who it is," Tom said finally, his voice steady but his knuckles white where he gripped the arm of his chair. "I need to know who I've been confiding in, who I've been sharing family moments with, who's been sitting at my dinner table while planning my destruction." Charles stepped forward, his diplomatic instincts kicking in despite the personal nature of the crisis. "Tom, we must be careful not to let suspicion poison your relationships. Sometimes these investigations take time, and jumping to conclusions can what?" Tom's voice rose sharply. "Can make things worse? Charles, things are already as bad as they can get. My 8-year-old son asked me yesterday if we were going to prison. My daughter won't answer her phone because she's afraid journalists will somehow trace the call. How exactly could jumping to conclusions make any of this worse?" Camilla flinched at the mention of her grandchildren, and could see the internal battle playing out across her face. As queen, she had to maintain composure and consider the broader implications of any action. As a mother and grandmother, she wanted to fight with everything she had to protect her family. Morrison cleared his throat diplomatically. "Mr. Parker Bowles, I understand your frustration, but we have protocols for these investigations. If we move too quickly or reveal our suspicions prematurely, we risk losing the ability to gather evidence that could lead to criminal charges." "Criminal charges?" And interjected, "What exactly are we talking about here? Libel? Harassment? Potentially more serious than that, Your Royal Highness. If our suspicions are correct, we may be looking at violations of the Official Secrets Act, breach of privacy laws, and possibly charges related to extortion or blackmail." The room fell silent as the implications sank in, and had dealt with many crises over her decades of public service. But the sophistication of this attack was unlike anything she had encountered. Modern technology had made it possible for small groups of determined individuals to wage campaigns that could rival the effectiveness of state-sponsored operations. Tom stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the tourist gathering near the castle gates. "Do you know what the cruelest part is?" he said without turning around. "Those people out there, taking pictures and buying souvenirs, they think this is all glamorous. They think being connected to the royal family means endless privilege and an easy life." He turned back to face the room and was struck by how much older he looked than he had just hours earlier. "But the truth is, it means your children can't have normal childhoods. It means your spouse's career becomes a liability. It means every business decision you make is scrutinized for evidence of corruption, even when you bend over backward to avoid any appearance of impropriety." "Tom," Camilla said softly, "we knew this wouldn't be easy when Charles and I married. We discussed the challenges, did we?" Tom interrupted, but his tone was sad rather than angry. "Did we really understand what it would mean? Because I don't think I did. I thought it would be intrusive press coverage and awkward social situations. I didn't think it would mean having to explain to my children why people hate them for something they had no control over," and had remained silent through much of the conversation. But now she moved closer to her stepnephew. Her reputation for being direct and sometimes brusque served her well in moments like this, when delicate diplomatic language wasn't enough. "Tom, look at me," she said firmly. He met her eyes, and she was reminded of how much he resembled his mother, particularly around the eyes. "Do you want to know what I learned during my divorce? What I learned when my children were being stalked by photographers. What I learned when every mistake I made was front-page news for weeks." Tom nodded, seeming to sense that, and was about to share something important. "I learned that running away doesn't solve anything. It just changes the location of your problems and adds new ones. If you move abroad, you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering if today is the day they find you again. Your children will grow up knowing that their family was forced into exile. Is that really better than fighting back? Fighting back with what? Tom asked. We can't respond to lies without looking defensive. We can't take legal action without appearing litigious. We can't ignore it without looking guilty. What exactly do you suggest we fight back with? And smiled, and Morrison recognized the expression. He had seen Princess Anne in action before, had watched her navigate complex diplomatic situations with a combination of intelligence, determination, and strategic thinking that had earned her respect throughout the Commonwealth. We fight back with the truth, and said simply. But we do it smart, and we do it together. Charles looked intrigued despite his obvious worry. What did you have in mind? Morrison, and said, turning to the detective inspector, how long would it take your investigation to identify this insider who's been feeding information to the press? With the right cooperation and resources, perhaps 2 to 3 weeks, Your Royal Highness. But, as I mentioned, we need to be careful not to 2 to 3 weeks, and repeated. Tom, can your family survive 2 to 3 more weeks of this intensity? Tom considered the question seriously. Maybe. If we know there's an endpoint in sight, if we know someone is actually working to solve this problem instead of just managing it, then maybe, and nodded. Charles, what resources does the palace have for dealing with coordinated social media attacks? Our communications team has been monitoring the situation, but their expertise is more traditional media relations. This kind of digital warfare is relatively new territory for us. Then, we need new expertise, and said matter-of-factly. Morrison, I assume you have connections with cybercrime specialists? Yes, ma'am. There are units within the Metropolitan Police that specialize in online harassment and digital evidence gathering. And turn back to Tom. Here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to find out who's been betraying your trust, and we're going to build a legal case against them. Second, we're going to work with experts to track down the people behind these coordinated attacks and hold them accountable. Third, and most importantly, we're going to tell your story properly. Tell my story how? Tom asked. Through channels they can't control or manipulate, and replied. A carefully planned interview with a respected journalist, perhaps a documentary format that allows you to present the facts without interruption or editing. You show people who you really are, what your work actually involves, and how these attacks have affected your family. Camilla looked uncertain. And that sounds dangerously close to engaging with a media circus. Our usual policy, and interrupted, was developed for a different era, when the palace could control information flow through a small number of established media outlets. When social media didn't exist, and coordinated disinformation campaigns were the province of nation-states, not angry individuals with laptops. She moved to the center of the room, commanding attention in the way that had made her one of the most effective working royals for decades. The world has changed. Our enemies have adapted their tactics. We need to adapt ours as well, or we'll keep fighting 21st century battles with 20th century strategies. Morrison nodded slowly. Her Royal Highness has a point. Traditional palace communication strategies aren't designed to handle the speed and reach of modern digital attacks. By the time official responses are crafted and approved, the false narratives have already been shared thousands of times. Charles looked troubled. But if we start responding directly to every attack, where does it end? Do we engage in public debates with every critic? Do we start defending every aspect of our private lives? No, and said firmly. We pick our battles carefully. We respond when the attacks are coordinated, false, and damaging to real people's lives. We don't respond to every bit of gossip or criticism, but we also don't let sophisticated disinformation campaigns destroy family members. Tom had been listening intently, and now he looked more hopeful than he had all day. You really think this could work? That we could actually fight back instead of just enduring? I think, and said, that you have more power than you realize. You're not just a victim of these attacks. You're someone with a story worth telling, with expertise worth sharing, and with a family worth protecting. The people attacking you are counting on you to remain silent and isolated. What if you didn't? The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Mrs. Henderson entered with a tea service, but and could tell from her expression that she was bringing more than refreshments. "Your Majesties," she said quietly, "there's been a development. The communications office has received a call from the BBC. They're asking for comment on a story that's scheduled to run tomorrow morning." Tom's face went pale. "What story?" "Something about alleged financial irregularities in your business dealings, sir. They claim to have documents showing preferential treatment from suppliers who are hoping to gain royal endorsements." The room erupted in angry voices as Tom vehemently denied the allegations, and Charles demanded to know how the BBC had obtained such information. And found herself studying Morrison's face, and what she saw there confirmed her suspicions. The detective inspector wasn't surprised by this development. He had been expecting it. "Morrison," and said sharply, cutting through the family's distress, "you knew this was coming." He nodded reluctantly. "We had indications that another major story was in preparation. The timing suggests coordination with the social media campaign." "What kind of documents are they claiming to have?" And asked. "We don't know yet, Your Royal Highness. But given the pattern we've observed, they're likely to be authentic documents that have been taken out of context or paired with false interpretations." Tom slumped back into his chair. "They have my business records. Somehow, someone has accessed my private business records and is using them to build a case against me." The magnitude of the betrayal was beginning to sink in. This wasn't just someone leaking gossip or sharing personal information. This was someone with access to confidential financial documents, someone who had been systematically gathering evidence for weeks or possibly months. Anne's mind was racing through possibilities. "Tom, who has access to your business records? Your accountant? Your business partner? Your assistant? All of them," Tom said quietly. "Plus my lawyer, my financial advisor, and Emma, obviously. But these are people I've trusted for years. Some of them worked with me long before Mother married Charles." "People change," and said grimly, "especially when large sums of money are involved." "Morrison, how much money are we talking about? What could someone earn by providing this kind of information to the media?" "Difficult to say precisely, Your Royal Highness, but exclusive access to damaging information about the royal family could be worth hundreds of thousands of pounds to the right publications. Possibly more if it's part of a larger book or documentary project." The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the implications. Someone Tom trusted, someone who sat in his business meetings and knew his family, had been systematically building a case against him for what could amount to a substantial payday. "We need to know tonight," and said decisively. "Before this story runs tomorrow, we need to know who's been feeding information to the media. Morrison, can your people accelerate their timeline?" "It's possible, Your Royal Highness, but it would require Mr. Parker Bowles to take some risks." Tom looked up sharply. "What kind of risks?" Morrison glanced at Charles and Camilla before answering. "We would need you to make contact with your key associates tonight, under surveillance. We've prepared some false information that we could use to trace the source of leaks. If you shared different versions of this false information with different people, we could determine who's been passing details to the media by seeing which version appears in tomorrow's coverage." "A trap," Tom said. "Yes, sir, but one that would require you to lie to people you trust, including potentially innocent individuals who have been loyal to you throughout this crisis." Tom was quiet for a long moment, weighing the moral complexity of Morrison's suggestion, and watched him struggle with the decision, recognizing the impossible position he was in. To clear his name and protect his family, he would have to deceive everyone in his inner circle. "What happens if we don't do this?" Tom asked finally. "Tomorrow's story runs, followed by whatever they have planned for next week, and the week after," Morrison replied. "Based on the pattern we've observed, this campaign is designed to build over time, with each revelation more damaging than the last." Charles spoke up for the first time in several minutes. "Tom, whatever you decide, you have our full support. But Morrison is right about the timeline. If we're going to act, it needs to be tonight." Tom looked at his mother, who had remained silent throughout Morrison's explanation. Camilla's face was streaked with tears, but her expression was resolute. "Do what you need to do," she said softly. "Protect your family. We'll handle whatever consequences come from fighting back." As Tom nodded his agreement to Morrison's plan and realized that the guard in the corner had witnessed something unprecedented. A member of the royal family had just decided to actively fight back against a coordinated attack, using methods that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. The ancient walls of Windsor Castle had seen many family crises over the centuries, but this felt different. This felt like the beginning of a new kind of battle, one that would determine whether the monarchy could adapt quickly enough to survive in an age of digital warfare and instant global communication. Third document, the hours that followed Tom's decision to cooperate with Morrison's trap unfolded with the precision of a military operation, and watched as the detective inspector coordinated with his team via secure communications, transforming the blue drawing room into an impromptu command center. The family lunch that had brought them together now seemed like a distant memory. Tom sat at a writing desk, carefully crafting 3 different versions of a fictional business proposal, each containing unique identifying details that would allow Morrison's team to trace which version made its way to the media. The psychological weight of the exercise was evident on his face as he prepared to deliberately deceive people he had trusted for years. The first version goes to your accountant, Morrison explained, checking his notes. You'll call him about a supposed new contract with a hotel chain in Scotland. The second version goes to your business partner, involving a restaurant group in Wales. The third goes to your assistant, about a catering contract for a corporate client in Northern Ireland, and admired the strategic thinking behind Morrison's plan. By creating 3 geographically distinct fictional scenarios, they would be able to identify not just who was leaking information, but potentially trace the networks being used to distribute it to the media. What if more than one of them is involved? Tom asked, his voice heavy with the possibility that multiple people had betrayed him. Then, we'll know that too, Morrison replied. The important thing is that by tomorrow morning, we'll have definitive proof of who's been feeding your private information to the press. Charles had spent the past hour on secure phone calls with his private secretary and the palace communications team, preparing for what could become a very public confrontation with the media. The decision to fight back represented a significant shift in royal strategy, one that could have implications far beyond Tom's immediate crisis. The palace legal team is standing by, Charles reported after ending his latest call. If we identify the source of the leaks tonight, we can have injunction papers filed within hours to prevent further publication of stolen private documents. Camilla had remained quiet throughout the preparations, and could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. As a mother, she wanted to protect her son at any cost. As queen, she understood that their actions tonight could set precedents that would affect how the monarchy handled future crises. Are we sure this is the right approach? Camilla asked quietly. What if fighting back just makes them more aggressive? What if it draws even more attention to the attacks? And moved to sit beside her sister-in-law, recognizing the weight of uncertainty that came with making decisions that could affect not just their family, but the institution they served. Camilla, and said gently, I've been dealing with media intrusion for over 50 years. I tried ignoring it, managing it, and accommodating it. But I've learned that some battles have to be fought, not because we want to, but because the alternative is worse. She gestured toward Tom, who was now on the phone with his accountant, his voice carefully controlled as he shared the first piece of false information. Look at what they're doing to him. Look at what they're doing to his children. This isn't normal press coverage or legitimate public interest. This is warfare, and warfare requires a response. Morrison's phone buzzed with an encrypted message, and his expression grew tense as he read it. Your Majesties, my team has identified unusual activity on several social media accounts that have been promoting the attacks against Mr. Parker Bowles. Someone is coordinating a major push for tomorrow morning, timed to coincide with the BBC story. What kind of push? Charles asked. Hundreds of fake accounts are preparing to share and amplify whatever story breaks tomorrow. It's designed to make the coverage appear more widespread and organic than it actually is, potentially influencing how other media outlets decide to cover the story. And felt a chill as she realized the full sophistication of the campaign against Tom. This wasn't just someone leaking information for money. This was a coordinated attack designed to destroy his reputation and, by extension, damaged the royal family's credibility. Tom finished his call with the accountant and immediately dialed his business partner and watched him struggle to maintain normal conversation while sharing information he knew might be used against him. The psychological toll of the deception was evident, but his determination to protect his family was stronger than his discomfort. Version 2 complete. Tom reported to Morrison after ending the second call. James seemed surprised by the Welsh restaurant proposal, but he didn't ask too many questions. Good, Morrison replied, making notes on his tablet. One more call, and then we wait. As Tom prepared to call his assistant, Anne's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and saw it was her daughter, Zara. Given the sensitivity of the current situation, she almost declined the call, but something made her answer. Mom, Zara's voice was tight with concern. I'm seeing some really nasty stuff online about Tom. Is everything okay? And step away from the group, lowering her voice. We're handling it, darling. But thank you for calling. Mom, this looks coordinated. Someone's spending serious money to promote these stories. I've seen this kind of thing before with athletes who get targeted by betting syndicates or rival agents. This isn't random trolling. Anne's blood ran cold. Zara's experience in the equestrian world had exposed her to various forms of competitive sabotage, but the parallel to Tom's situation was chilling. What do you mean by spending money? Anne asked. Promoted posts, bot networks, influencer payments. Someone is paying to ensure these stories reach as many people as possible. Mom, this could cost tens of thousands of pounds to execute at this scale. And thanked her daughter and returned to the group, her mind racing with new possibilities. If Zara was right about the financial investment behind the attacks, then this was more than just opportunistic leak selling. Someone was funding a sustained campaign against Tom, which meant the motivations might be political rather than purely financial. Morrison said urgently, we need to expand our investigation. My daughter thinks someone is spending significant money to amplify these attacks through social media advertising and bot networks. Morrison nodded grimly. That would align with what we've observed. The reach and engagement patterns don't match organic social media spread. Someone is investing heavily in ensuring maximum damage. Tom looked up from his phone, having overheard the conversation. Are you saying someone is paying to destroy my reputation? Not just selling information for money, but actually investing their own money to attack me? It's possible, Morrison replied. If that's the case, we need to understand their ultimate objective. Are they trying to damage the monarchy generally? Force policy changes? Influence political outcomes? The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the implications. What had started as a family crisis was beginning to look like something much larger and more sinister. Tom's phone rang, interrupting the tense atmosphere. He glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. It's Emma, he said. My wife. She's supposed to be at her office today. He answered the call, putting it on speaker so the room could hear. Emma's voice was shaky and frightened. Tom, something's happening at my office. There are photographers outside the building, and my boss wants to see me immediately. He says there are questions about my associations and their impact on the firm's reputation. Tom's face hardened with anger. Emma, don't say anything to anyone. I'm sending a car to bring you home immediately. Tom, I can't just leave work. I have deadlines, responsibilities. Emma, please. Trust me. We'll sort this out, but right now I need you somewhere safe. After Emma agreed to wait for the car, Tom ended the call and looked around the room with a mixture of rage and desperation. They're going after my wife's career now, he said. She's an architect. She designs office buildings. She has nothing to do with any of this, but they're making her a target because she's married to me and had heard enough. The attack on Emma had crossed a line that made this personal for her in a way that abstract discussions of media strategy never could. Emma was an innocent person being destroyed for the crime of loving someone connected to the royal family. Morrison said with steel at her voice, I want to know who's funding this campaign, and I want to know tonight. Use whatever resources you need, bring in whatever specialists you require, but I want answers. Your Royal Highness, that level of investigation could take weeks. You don't have weeks, and interrupted. You have hours, because tomorrow morning We're not just responding to whatever story they publish. We're going public with everything we know about who's behind these attacks and why." Charles looked alarmed. "And that's a significant escalation. If we make accusations without absolute proof, then we make sure we have absolute proof," and replied. "Morrison, what would you need to accelerate your timeline from weeks to hours?" Morrison considered the question carefully. Direct access to Mr. Parker Bowles's business communications, permission to monitor his associates' digital activity, and coordination with a cybercrime unit to trace the financial flows behind the social media campaigns. "You have all of that," and said decisively. "Tom, you'll need to provide Morrison with access to everything. Your emails, your phone records, your business accounts. Everything." Tom nodded without hesitation. "Whatever it takes." Charles, and continued, "We need the Palace Communications team to prepare for a full offensive tomorrow. Not just responding to their story, but telling our own story completely." As the room mobilized around Anne's decisive leadership, Morrison received another encrypted message. This one made him smile for the first time all day. "Your Majesties," he said, "we may have caught a break. My team has intercepted communications suggesting that whoever is behind this campaign is planning something for tonight as well. They're not waiting for tomorrow's story to run. They're preparing to release additional material this evening." "What kind of material?" Tom asked. "We don't know yet, but the timing suggests they're trying to stay ahead of any potential legal action. If they release everything tonight, it becomes much harder to obtain injunctions to stop publication, and realize that their enemies were thinking several steps ahead, just as Morrison's team was. The battle for Tom's reputation was about to accelerate dramatically. How long before they released this additional material? And asked. Morrison checked his watch. "Based on the communications we've intercepted, probably within the next 2 hours." And looked around the room at her family members, seeing determination replacing despair on their faces. The decision to fight back had energized everyone, giving them a sense of agency they had lost during weeks of passive endurance. Then, "We have 2 hours to get ahead of their story," and said, "Morrison, what do you need from us to identify their source and trace their funding in the next 2 hours?" Full cooperation, no questions asked, and the understanding that some of what we discover might be painful for Mr. Parker Bowles and his family. Tom stood up straighter, his earlier vulnerability replaced by grim resolve. "Whatever it takes to protect my family and clear my name. Do it." As Morrison's team swung into action, and couldn't help but feel that they had just crossed a point of no return. The royal family was about to engage in a very public battle using tactics they had never employed before. The guard who had watched silently from the corner throughout the day was about to witness history being made, though whether it would be remembered as a victory or a disaster remained to be seen. Fourth document, the next 2 hours unfolded with the intensity of a thriller novel, as Morrison's expanded team worked with methodical precision to unravel the conspiracy against Tom Parker Bowles. The blue drawing room had been transformed into a high-tech command center, with laptops, secure phones, and monitoring equipment that seemed incongruous against the ancient tapestries and royal portraits. And watched Morrison's specialists work, impressed despite herself by the sophistication of modern investigative techniques. Within minutes of gaining access to Tom's business communications, they had identified suspicious patterns in email timing and frequency that suggested coordinated information gathering stretching back nearly 6 months. The data theft was systematic, reported Detective Sergeant Shun, Morrison's digital forensics specialist. Someone with administrative access to Mr. Parker Bowles' business systems has been copying files regularly, always during off hours, always in small batches to avoid triggering security alerts. Tom looked stricken. "Administrative access means it's someone I gave my passwords to, someone I trusted completely." "I'm afraid so, sir," Chin replied. "But we're about to narrow down exactly who it is." On cue, Tom's phone buzzed with a text message from his assistant, Sarah, asking about the Northern Ireland catering contract he had mentioned in their earlier call. The speed of her response to the fictional scenario was telling. "Interesting," Morrison observed. "She's asking follow-up questions about a contract that doesn't exist just 2 hours after you mentioned it." that suggests either unusual curiosity or urgent need to gather more details for someone else. And studied Tom's face as he read Sarah's message. "How long has she worked for you?" "For years," Tom replied, his voice heavy with disappointment. "I trusted her with everything. She organized my children's birthday parties, helped Emma coordinate our house renovation. She's been like family. Family who had access to your business systems, your calendar, your financial records, and your personal communications," Morrison added grimly. "If it is her, she would have been perfectly positioned to provide the kind of detailed intelligence we've seen in the media attacks." Charles, who had been quietly coordinating with the palace legal team, looked up from his phone with disturbing news. The injunction applications are running into problems. The media outlets are claiming protection under public interest provisions, arguing that Tom's business practices are legitimately newsworthy because of his connection to the royal family, and felt a familiar frustration. The same royal connection that made Tom a target also made it nearly impossible to use legal tools that would be available to private citizens facing similar attacks. "What about the criminal investigation?" and asked Morrison. "If we can prove systematic theft of private documents and coordinated harassment, surely that overrides any public interest claims?" "That's our hope, Your Royal Highness, but we need more evidence. We need to trace the financial flows and identify the coordination mechanisms they've been using." Detective Sergeant Shun looked up from her laptop with excitement. "I think I found something. The social media accounts promoting the attacks against Mr. Parker Bowles are being managed through a digital marketing agency based in Eastern Europe. The agency specializes in reputation management, but their client list suggests they also handle reputation destruction. Can you trace who's paying them?" and asked. "Working on it, but these transactions are designed to be difficult to follow. Multiple shell companies, cryptocurrency payments, offshore banking. This is professional-level operational security." Anne's phone buzzed with a call from Zara. She answered quickly, hoping her daughter had more insights from her experience with targeted online campaigns. "Mom," Zara said without preamble, "I've been digging into those social media patterns we discussed. I think you need to know that some of the accounts pushing the Tom stories are the same ones that were attacking other royal family members over the past year." Anne's blood chilled. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this isn't just about Tom. These same networks have been involved in campaigns against William and Catherine, against the Wales children's privacy, even against some of your own environmental initiatives. Someone has been waging systematic warfare against the entire family for months, and Tom's just the current focus." And shared this information with the room, and the atmosphere grew even more tense. What they had interpreted as a targeted attack against one family member was beginning to look like part of a much larger campaign against the monarchy itself. Morrison's phone rang with an urgent call from his cybercrime colleagues. The conversation was brief but intense, conducted mostly in technical jargon that Anne couldn't follow. When he ended the call, his expression was grave. "Your Majesties, we've identified the source of the additional material they're planning to release tonight. It's not more business documents or financial records." "What is it?" Tom asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "Personal communications. Text messages, emails, and voice messages between you and your family members. Private conversations about your feelings regarding your mother's marriage to His Majesty. Discussions about the pressures of royal life. Arguments with your wife about whether to distance yourselves from the royal family." The room erupted in shocked exclamations as everyone realized the full scope of the violation. This wasn't just about Tom's business reputation. It was about exposing the most private family communications and using them to create maximum emotional damage. Tom slumped in his chair, the weight of the betrayal finally overwhelming him. "She recorded our conversations." Sarah was recording private conversations and giving them to the media, and felt a cold rage building in her chest. The attack on Tom's business practices had been professionally damaging, but survivable. But the violation of private family communications crossed into territory that felt almost criminal in its cruelty. "Morrison," Anne said with deadly calm, "I want her arrested tonight. Before she can release any more stolen communications, before she can destroy evidence, before she can flee the country." "Your Royal Highness, we don't quite have enough evidence for arrest yet." "Then, get enough evidence," and interrupted. "Use whatever resources you need, call in whatever favors you have, but I want this woman in custody within the hour." Charles looked concerned about the escalation. "And we need to be careful not to overreach. If we move too aggressively without sufficient evidence." Charles, and cut him off. They have private conversations between Tom and Emma discussing whether to leave the country to protect their children. They have recordings of Tom talking to his kids about the media harassment. If that material becomes public, it won't just damage Tom's reputation. It will traumatize his entire family and hand our enemies a propaganda victory they can use for years. The stark reality of Anne's words settled over the room. This had moved far beyond media management or reputation protection. They were now dealing with what amounted to psychological warfare against family members, including children. Camilla, who had been silent for much of the evening, finally spoke up. "What do you need from us, Morrison? What can we do to stop this?" "We need Mr. Parker Bowles to make contact with his assistant one more time," Morrison replied. "We need her to confirm her location and potentially provide evidence of her activities. But, sir, this call will likely be the most difficult conversation you've ever had." Tom nodded grimly. "What do I say to someone who's been systematically destroying my life while pretending to care about my family?" Morrison handed Tom a script that had been prepared by his team psychologists. "We need you to sound concerned, but not suspicious. Tell her you're worried about tomorrow's media coverage and ask if she has any advice for handling the situation. If she's working with the media, she may reveal information about their plans." As Tom prepared to make the call, Detective Sergeant Shun announced a breakthrough in tracing the financial flows behind the social media campaigns. "The funding is coming from a consortium of sources," she reported. "Some appear to be political groups opposed to the monarchy, but there are also commercial interests involved. Publishing companies, media organizations, potentially even foreign entities interested in destabilizing British institutions." And absorbed this information with growing alarm. What had started as a family crisis was revealing itself to be part of a sophisticated campaign against the constitutional monarchy itself. "Foreign entities?" Charles asked sharply. "We're still investigating, Your Majesty, but some of the payment flows suggest coordination with groups that have previously targeted other European royal families. This may be part of a broader international effort to undermine monarchical institutions." As the full scope of the conspiracy became clear, and realized they were facing something unprecedented in royal history. Previous media crises had involved individual journalists or publications pursuing stories for commercial, editorial reasons. This was different. A coordinated, well-funded, international campaign using modern digital warfare techniques to attack the institution of monarchy itself. Tom's call to Sarah began with careful pleasantries, and could see him struggling to maintain normal conversation with someone who had betrayed him so thoroughly. Sarah's responses were telling. She seemed unusually interested in Tom's emotional state and his family's plans for dealing with the media attention. "She's fishing for information about our response strategy," Morrison whispered. "She wants to know if we're planning legal action or public statements." Tom skillfully avoided giving away their plans while encouraging Sarah to share what she knew about the media's intentions. Her responses confirmed Morrison's team's intelligence about additional releases planned for that evening. "Sarah just told me that things are going to get much worse before they get better," Tom reported after ending the call. "She said the story tomorrow is just the beginning and that I should prepare my family for much more intensive coverage." Morrison nodded with satisfaction. That's enough to demonstrate her knowledge of coordinated media activities. Combined with the digital evidence we've gathered, we have grounds for arrest. Within minutes, Morrison was coordinating with multiple police units. Sarah's arrest would occur simultaneously with raids on the Eastern European Digital Marketing Agency and several of their British associates. The operation would also attempt to prevent the release of the stolen personal communications. And watched the coordinated law enforcement response with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that justice was finally being served, but sadness that it had come to this. The intimate betrayal of trust represented something dark about modern life. where technology made it possible for those closest to you to become your most dangerous enemies. Your Majesties, Morrison reported after coordinating with his various teams, Sarah Collins has been arrested at her home in Surrey. Initial searches have recovered multiple recording devices, copied business documents, and communications with media outlets. We've also disrupted the planned release of additional stolen materials. Tom closed his eyes in relief, and could see the emotional toll the day had taken on him. Learning that someone he had trusted like family had been systematically betraying him for months would leave scars that would take time to heal. What happens now? Camilla asked. Now we tell the truth, and replied. Tomorrow morning, before any of their planned stories can run, we hold a press conference. We present the evidence of coordinated attacks, systematic data theft, and international funding. We turn this from a story about Tom's alleged business improprieties into a story about sophisticated warfare against British institutions. Charles looked uncertain. And that's a significant escalation. Once we make this public, we can't walk it back. We can't walk it back anyway, and replied. They've already escalated this beyond anything we've dealt with before. Our choice is to respond effectively or to keep taking damage until there's nothing left to protect. As the evening drew to a close and reflected on how much had changed in just one day, they had started with a family lunch and a relatively contained media crisis. They were ending with arrests, international investigations, and preparations for a public confrontation that would test the monarchy's ability to adapt to modern threats. Morrison's final report confirmed that they had identified and disrupted a sophisticated network designed to wage long-term warfare against the royal family. The investigation would continue for months, but they had prevented the immediate crisis from destroying Tom's family and potentially saved other royal family members from similar attacks. The guard who had watched from the corner throughout the day's events would later describe it as the moment when the royal family stopped being passive targets and became active defenders of their own institution. Whether history would judge their response as appropriate or excessive remained to be seen, but it was certain they had made the only choice that would allow them to sleep peacefully that night. As the family prepared to leave Windsor Castle, Tom approached, and with obvious gratitude and lingering uncertainty. "Do you think we did the right thing?" he asked. "Fighting back like this, arresting someone who worked for our family, making this whole thing public?" And looked at her stepnephew, seeing in his face the same struggle between duty and personal desire that had defined royal life for centuries. "Tom," she said gently, "I think we did the only thing that would let your children grow up knowing that their family doesn't abandon each other when things get difficult. Everything else we'll figure out as we go." The ancient walls of Windsor Castle had witnessed many family crises over the centuries, but the events of this day marked something new. The moment when the monarchy decided to fight back against the digital age's new forms of warfare, whatever the consequences might be.